Okay, so I promised today we would talk about the hard things. Welcome, everyone. But before we do get to that, we've got an hour, 55 minutes now, just to get through a bunch of things and some housekeeping at the start. So welcome. Thank you very much for joining us on a Thursday. We love these things. It's the middle of winter and a good chance. I love having the people who are on today. I've learned something from every single one of them in the last 6 months. So I guarantee you will walk away with some gem today. So the hard things, today's topic, there are two hard things in technology. We all know them. Number one is naming things. Number two is business cases. And that's what we want to talk about today, is how do you explain the amazing work that gets done? Number three is an out by one error, of course, that old joke. So let me introduce the panel, because they're sitting here very patiently listening to me rabbit on. So super excited to have Tom Vasavsky with us. Been a colleague of mine for a long time. First met Tom as a young man at Lonely Planet when he was a thought worker, actually at the time, one of the bright young things helping us unravel a real ball of wool. Now Chief Product and Technology Officer at catch.com.au. And but before that, spent time as the Chief Technology Officer at the REA Group, one of Australia's fairly successful companies, really, particularly if you judge it by market share and share price. He's got lots of lessons today. I'm curious as to why he's a product and technology officer, if that's part of the answer to the question today. Megan Waters joins us, as she reminded us earlier, from the free country of New South Wales. Product and experience design principal at Thoughtworks, a professional I've heard her speak many times. She has such great stories and a great sense of humor, but a very serious side too, in terms of getting the application of her trade, which she'll explain to us later, is in design and design thinking, working much better for the humans who use our technology. So it brings a really interesting angle to this question today about how to modernize enterprises and tell the story. Peter, an active participant. Peter, I'm not even sure we've met since I started work in the COVID period over a year ago. We've maybe had one beer together in that time, which is criminal because you are a great teacher, a hands-on technologist, executive and consultant in your past and present, and you solve the hard problems. But goodness me, you do spend a lot of time in Zoom, I know, these days. And as a principal technologist, that's Zoom and Miro are now your core technology platforms. I, however, am just a modest social scientist, works at Thoughtworks, have been there for 2 of the most enjoyable years of my life, that's for sure, and I love doing things like this. So today we're going to talk about a paper that was published back in May, and it's got that fabulous, it got past the Harvard Business Review levels of publishing. So that means it's a good paper. Now, you can read it. It's quite long and quite detailed, and it's full of incredibly useful things for people today who are attempting to transform their organizations with technology. But it needs to be read and communicated far beyond the technologists. And that's really the cause for today. It talks about resilience. What is the business case for resilience? Why do we need resilience? We've built all the things, surely. We've implemented all the technology. It's all free from here. And I'd like the panel today to think about technology resilience, organizational resilience, and personal resilience, and their experiences of those. Megan, I'm going to start just a quick intro from you. I'd like, tell me the hardest thing you ever had to explain that was technical to a non-technical audience that had some stakes around it as a decision. And I get the pleasure of being the first person to say, you're on mute, Megan.
Now, I tried to tell someone they were on mute earlier today when I was on mute myself. It was,
for those attending, that is in Thoughtworks currency, that is 1 beer to Nigel.
10 the most difficult thing, well, it's all difficult for me because, I'm not a developer. I don't come from a development background. So my skill is more helping technologists to explain it, because I'm not afraid to ask really stupid questions so that then they can get down to the nitty gritty of why it's important and what it is that they're telling. So, so I'm looking to either Peter or Tom to go, what's the hardest thing they've had to do?
Yeah, well, Tom's next to you on my screen. So, Tom, gee, you and I have had some adventures in time, and you managed to persuade the REA group board to do something as crazy as go single cloud after a multi-cloud, very expensive decade. Is that the hardest thing you've ever had to explain to a board of directors?
It was up there. I think probably it used to be explaining data science. It used to be explaining what it is and what it can do. Now I find it's the opposite. It's explaining that AI is not magic and there are limits and it can't do everything you think it can do. So I feel like that's flipped on its head a bit.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And look, I'm curious. I'm going to ask the question up front. Why the switch? You've gone from a giant global marketplace for property, almost a monopoly. I get into trouble from the ACCC for saying that in Australia, and gone to a relatively small, to be honest, in comparison, marketplace in a market where you're fighting Amazon.com.au. What caused you to do the switch?
Lots of reasons, but actually part of the reason is the opportunity to enact some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. So if you look at the state of where Catch is at, it's basically at the foothills of a big modernization journey. So, and as a technologist and as a product person, have the opportunity to have a huge impact through that journey is too good to refuse.
Oh, fantastic. Peter Barnes, welcome. If I didn't describe your background adequately, please correct it. But I'm super interested. What's the toughest thing you've ever explained? Was it some immensely complex architecture or?
No, it's not that far off. Tom's actually, so it's a little while back now, but explaining convolution neural nets to a group of energy utilities executives who had grown up in their organizations from being out in the field looking up at power poles. They were very good with poles and wires, weren't necessarily technologists. And coming up with an analogy and not setting an unrealistic expectation, to Tom's point, about what is possible with deep learning in that environment was something, it was somewhat of a challenge.
Yeah, excellent examples. Now, we also have Sarah Taraporawala with us, who is my technical mediator assistant, and she's got a little button called the bullshit button, which she'll press if there's she feels any of our panelists are faking it and not telling the real thing. So, look, let's look to the paper, and back to you, Tom, because I think one of the themes of the paper that you looked at was the difference between different organization states. So defensive versus an offensive growth strategy, a motivator of change. Does the argument for investing in technology and modernization differ between those two contexts?
I always think the organizational context makes a huge difference on how you approach technology. As technologists, I always tell my team, we don't exist in isolation. We exist to be part of a business strategy, a purpose, a reason to be. So my answer to that question would be the technology strategy needs to match the business strategy. And if the technology strategy, if the business strategy is offensive, then I think it makes sense to match that up with a very offensive technology strategy as well. And then I think, and vice versa as well. And I guess the challenge comes when there's a mismatch between those two things. If you've got an offensive business strategy but a defensive technology strategy, then there's a mismatch in leadership or a mismatch in the approach, or something's not quite right, because those two things are not going to achieve the overall outcome for the business.
Now, the worst case scenario I've faced in a defensive situation, and it's not always your choice either, as the context comes to you in some cases, is the need to cut costs. And although I think there's a special medal for anyone who can argue you need to spend money to save money. Megan, have you run into any organizations who've started their journey from a cost-cutting perspective? Have you had to endure that pain? Oh, and Megan, that's 2 beers now. 2 beers now.
You've got to understand, I live under a flight path, and so I just kind of get a bit panicky when the planes are going super low, because I don't want to I don't want to trigger anyone about the fact that they can't get on a plane, right? No. So I'm being caring of our audience here. Look, cost cutting all the time. And what's kind of interesting is that where you see a mismatch in cost cutting and revenue generation in different parts of the organization. And I think that's one of the challenges, where it's like, oh no, we need to cost cut in the tech. oh, but we need to spend money, say, in product or something like that to build new products to get out there into market and, like generate revenue and all of this sort of thing. And it's like, hang on a moment, you got something really going squirrely here, because how do you think you're actually taking those products to market, and how do you think you're going to end up with that speed still in there? So it happens all the time, and I think it is one of those pieces of to what Tom was saying as well. It's like you need to look at what is the overall business strategy and reinforce that and get people to focus back onto that business strategy, as opposed to almost that localized optimization, which you see so much of.
It's a good point to flip back to Tom on, actually. Tom, so a cloud strategy, an Amazon Web Services strategy, is that a cost-cutting strategy? Is it a technical, flexible strategy? Is it a growth strategy? I mean, it's played out over 10 years now. What's your experience?
I mean, that's a really good example, because I think depending on the leadership in the organization, you may see it as any one of those three things. So there's been plenty of cloud migrations where we've gone from data centers to the cloud, and we get to the end of that journey, and actually our overall infrastructure cost has gone up. So
okay, the horrible moment there, that's probably number one reality moment for a lot of business people, because they've read in Time magazine that the cloud cuts costs.
Yeah, so one way to look at that, one way to look at that would be, a CFO might start here, which is, oh my God, what's happened? The cost has increased, getting the same thing out. The more sophisticated answer is actually the different things, and the things you can do on the cloud today, you couldn't do with your old CapEx infrastructure in the past. So what are those things, and what is the measure? How do you measure the value that those things provide? And if those things are not valuable to the organization, then the CFO's question is right. If those things are valuable, then what's the dollar value you place on things like agility, flexibility, developers being empowered, scalability, all the kind of benefits that you get out of the cloud beyond just the dollars and cents.
Okay, so hard one for you, Peter. So speed to market, innovation. There's not a board of directors who don't love that idea. Is the cloud a surefire way? Is investing in getting off your own data? There's still plenty of people with their own data centers, those kind of things. Is it part of the journey? Is it irrelevant? Is it tangential? Or how does the cloud fit into an innovation journey?
It's one of the things, Nigel. It doesn't solve your problems in isolation. If you're coming from your own data centers and doing a lift and shift into cloud, you're moving from your own computers to somebody else's, and not much else changes. If you combine that with some transformation of your organization and your ways of working, and you start decomposing your tech estate and applying different methodologies to how you develop and evolve those technology assets, yeah, sure, it's a part, because it enables that without those big CapEx steps that you experienced in your own data centers when you had to go out and buy the hardware.
It was the delays that used to kill me. Provisioning, there was a whole, it was like a theater of provisioning, and procurement would get involved, and 6 months later boxes would turn up, and we'd send a young Tom Vasavsky with a carload of boxes down to the data center to install them. There's business value in that, isn't there?
Absolutely. And sometimes that's not something that is appreciated until you've got it. It's very hard to explain the value of being able to release daily to an organization that's only ever done it every 3 months. That the mindset and the understanding of the value of that takes some time to develop.
Yeah. And
I think
in terms of,
sorry, Tom. On the flip side as well, you've got companies don't exist in isolation either. They're competitors. So if your competitors has got capabilities that you don't have to release daily, or be more secure, or be more agile, then over the long term, that's going to be an issue, right?
Yeah.
So you both mentioned data, and I think there's not a business executive or board who don't get excited about machine learning, artificial intelligence, as I've been taught by Peter to say it. The case for that, is it special because of the huge quantities of data and storage costs and the tooling that's available from people like Google and Amazon Web Services? Is it a slam dunk to sell cloud innovation, modernization, if you've got a data agenda? Tom, you've done it.
I think it's a tricky one. I feel like the tooling and the infrastructure and the technologies have been quite commoditized now. So, there's quite well proven path to, the techniques and doing that kind of work. But I think the critical question is, like, what's the question we want to answer? If the organization doesn't really have a clear view on what the question is that they want to ask of that technology stack, of that capability, then to me that's alarm bells, because well, that could be a red flag for a huge investment in capability that doesn't deliver any value. So
I feel like you've wandered into Megan's territory now, and the psychology of good questions.
No, because I was going to say, because in fact I'm dealing with this at the moment where like the technical structure to enable the data is there, but it's like the organization hasn't taken advantage of that. And I see that a lot in a lot of kind of when people only concentrate on that enterprise modernization as a technical piece, where it's like, yeah, that's great, but it's not taking it through to how are you actually delivering value. And I think data is super key in that, because it's like so much data gets collected that almost you cannot now answer questions, because you have so much data that no one's really thought about to, like, how are we actually using that to get value into the hands of customers? And to define what value is, to define what our customers are, to define all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, absolutely, the cloud makes it more possible, makes it faster, makes it cheaper potentially, but not if you're not using it. Then it's just like, whoa, works on my theory that if you have all the books on the subject, it's the same as if you read that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like if you collect all the data, it's exactly the same as if you're actually using it, right? You're a data-led organization. No, you're a data collector organization, kind of thing. That's
Peter, you're at the front line of this. What's the state of Australian business at the moment? I mean, there must have been 1,000 business cases written in the last year, and all the money's ended up with Amazon Web Services. Are we on top of the wave now?
I don't know that we are. I think the realization of business value from the data is lagging a little, and I think we'll see a groundswell, if you like, coming through as that business value starts being translated at a higher rate. To Megan's point, the capability around data collection and data science and data engineering, that's really building. And like Tom said, some of the foundational services that have been commoditized, but the integration of that back into product, the technology work that needs to be done to build data-driven product when you're coming from a legacy tech estate is something that I think hasn't been done in many industries yet. For digital natives, it's come naturally. It's been there from the start. For a lot of enterprises, it wasn't built in. It wasn't in the DNA. The investment has gone into building a data platform and the analytics capability, but it hasn't gone into integrating into the product yet. And once that happens, there'll be a greater appreciation of the value, which will lead to a build-in as well, I think.
Right. So an organization's got $100 million. They had a fantastic year, $100 million surplus money to invest in this coming year. How does technology compete against the sizzle of a marketing executive who's let's do a gigantic television campaign and spend it all by Thursday? Your events people, your customer facing people, your office and real estate people who go, no, 100 million should go into a fit out of a new building so we can attract lots of amazing new .com software developers, new product research. How does modernizing the stack, the plumbing, compete against the sizzle of those things for the next 100 million? Megan, you're up first. Persuade me to spend 100 million in your space.
I think you need to establish those partnerships with those other people, because it's like, how are you actually going to deliver on the promises? Like, essentially, you can sell almost anything once. How do you continue to sell it, and how do you live up to that brand promise? You're going out with this fabulous campaign, and it's like, okay, cool. Can you actually deliver on it? Have you got truth in it? What's going to do it? So I think it's like you go and establish those partnerships, and you kind of drive through with that, rather than just going, because no one, honest to God, no one gets very excited by, like, oh, I'm going to, I don't know, something wacky and technical. I'm going to move to the cloud. It's like, yay, great. No, who cares? So yeah, that would be my advice.
I believe the referee for today, Sarah, has actually been with you on that one. Yes, people do get excited about moving to the cloud.
I often end up talking to some slightly different people. So, you know.
Yes. Oh, it's very hard to get an executive excited about it.
I'll defer to Peter and Tom.
Nigel, I think it needs to compete in the same dimensions that all the other functions compete. You know, it's so whether it's marketing or any of the other examples, like it's the same dimensions in business. Is it going to make a profit? Is it going to reduce risk? Is it going to make us more productive? Like what's the impact on the bottom line going to be? So I don't think we should shy away from that competition. I think that's healthy if we and it should drive technology leaders to be able to explain how modernization or any other initiative actually moves the business forward. And if we can't answer those questions, then it's going to be hard to get that next 100 million.
So actually a follow-up for you and Peter, have a think about this one in advance. I mean, I've worked at exec level. You've been an exec for a long time, Tom. Who does this well? Who does a great job of arguing for money within an organization? I've seen finance with a drop, an absolute so easy case to replace their finance systems, which is basically, yes, we need 100 million to put in Salesforce or NetSuite or otherwise, because otherwise we will all die. That's a pretty good business case. Who have you seen, like merger and acquisition teams, legal teams? Who's done the best business case you've seen to get 100 million sort of level money, Tom? Probably yourself.
I'm not sure if I've got great examples, but I can say that technologists are usually terrible at it. And often it's because we're not naturally salespeople, and there's an element of this which is data, which is the pragmatics of the dollars and the benefits and so on. And there's an element which is influencing and being able to tell stories and being able to get the ear of decision makers, CFOs, CEOs, and so on. So I think for technologies, I think to be able to do that, they need to practice those skills, and they need to have the audience as well. So that comes to how the organization is set up and the role of technology within the organization. I think having CEOs or leaders that really understand technology makes it a lot easier. So I'm very fortunate at the moment. I've got a CEO who's an ex-Amazon executive. He knows very well the value of technologies. I'm not having to sell very much. He just wants more of it faster. But if that's not your situation, then I think you need to take your leadership team and your CEO on that journey.
Peter, have you seen another kind of a non-technical party in organizations kind of frustratingly beat you to the 100 million? Who you've observed in your career does a great job of a business case for modernization that perhaps is not involving cloud or desktops or tech or SaaS or otherwise?
I would go back a long time to working in defense here, and anyone in uniform wanted things that floated, flew, or went bang. And they could make a very good case for that. We wanted to enable all of those things with technology, but it was pretty hard to get them to buy computers. That wasn't what they were interested in.
So a lot of the HBR article talks about that, and Tom, I think you're vocal on this, is about aligning that tech with some kind of business value. Is that easy to do?
I don't think it's easy, but I don't think we should shy away from it either, because I think if we can't do it, then we probably don't deserve the investment. So I think it's worth persevering, and I think particularly for technologists, we find it hard to deal with non-binary kind of challenges, and sometimes making a case for an investment or a benefit, is not a hard science. It's a bit of an art. But don't be afraid to put some numbers behind it, back yourself in terms of the benefits. I'll tell you a secret, that's what everybody else does. So that's how products get up, that's how other functions champion their investment. So don't shy away from backing yourself with a number, and it's all in the storytelling.
Absolutely, I'd agree 100% with that, Tom. I think we want to get it right. Technologists are often perfectionists. We want to get the right number, but sometimes close enough is good enough in those sort of arguments. As long as it's a defensible number and it's about right, it's good enough for a good business case, and it helps to buy hearts and minds. we nearly always try to influence with a credibility argument. We go and look for the data to support our position, but it's really taking the hearts along as well. We have to appeal to our colleagues, executive colleagues, with the vision of what can be achieved for the business more broadly, and not rely so much, I think, on that logical argument that we're most comfortable with.
What I do think that, oh, sorry, you go, Megan.
I was just going to say, I did like your point, Tom, around like storytelling, because it's that interesting piece, because, I sort of come more from that product and XD background, and storytelling is a big part of what we do, but it almost is a natural kind of allergic reaction for most technologists. I've learned to modify the language into, it's a narrative. You're taking people through a narrative to get there, because it's like storytelling. No, we can't tell stories. This is not fiction. This is reality, people. And it's like, yeah, but you'll lose out to your colleagues, exactly as you're saying.
I tell you what I enjoy, and I shouldn't be promoting something that we didn't write, but because we do have a reminder to the audience, a fantastic paper for you to read for homework afterwards. But Josh Arnold's work on black swan farming, what I like about his work about prioritization of investment in tech and justifying is he gives a really simple to use framework, which is based around quite a complicated thing called cost of delay. But gee, it starts to walk into the space that accountants understand. And he argues, and he and his co-author argue in that paper there's only 4 categories. So it's not quite binary, but 4 things you should be looking for: increasing revenue, protecting revenue, reducing costs, or avoiding costs. And I think that's a pretty good structure. The key question though, Meg, is like, let's get down to syntax. You got the chance to sit in front of some key influencers who are allocating budget. Is it PowerPoint? Is it Word? Is it how do you start constructing your narrative and presenting that narrative? What's your experience?
I will use whatever tool I think will resonate with that audience. If it's interpretive dance, I'm happy to put on a tutu. But seriously, it's like just had a great view into a client that we're currently working with, and it was that beautiful thing of, okay, bring together that narrative that gives that speaks to the business vision, that speaks to the technology improvement, that gets something that they want into market at that point, and constructing that strategy, which is effectively is what a narrative is that, well, the other way around. It's the strategy and the narrative, and it's that way of telling that story through. And I often do revert back to PowerPoint because it's the easiest way of telling a story. And your headlines, someone should be able to flick through those headlines and go, yeah, okay, that's the story. But I think part of it is that you actually need to be convinced of it yourself, that this really is the right thing. Even you cannot. If you're not convinced of it and you don't really believe it at a gut level, you are never going to make anyone else believe it either. And you kind of got to judge the way that you put it across based on your audience, because of course some audiences respond to being very clear cut and very data driven, and others are very much into the emotional drive of it. So vary it to it, but whichever way it runs, you have to believe it, and it has to speak to that business value, both the short term and the longer term, and like how it's going to do it and who else is engaged in it. And it should never be a surprise to the people who you're about to sell to either.
Peter, what's the most powerful A4 page you've ever presented to get some money invested in something technical, particularly? What's your best business case you've been involved in?
It's a fine question. It wasn't an A4 page, and I don't think I've used many A4 pages. I've had a lot of pictures. I think the older days that you tell a story, pictures tells a story of 1,000 words. Is true, but it's often much easier to illustrate that path and show the connection between what's often a really complex set of components in your tech estate and the outcomes and the bits that have to happen in the middle. Like Megan, I do occasionally resort to slides. I am also willing to do interpretive dance, but nobody wants to see me do that.
Yeah, I think my favorite one, I remember, and I'm older than all of you, so it's decades ago in New Zealand when I worked for a little company called National Mutual, and they had a CEO who was deeply passionate about customers, and I knew that. And they were broke. Honestly, they'd come out of a terrible few years, been purchased by a French company out of bankruptcy for just not quite having enough money in the bank. And there was a chance to improve customer service. We needed to start at the bottom with a full telephone system rebuilt. They had an ancient thing that was no good for anything. My business case was to go into the executive team, sit down, take the phone, we used to have phones in those days in the middle of the things, none of this fancy technology, take the phone and ring our 1300 number. 6 minutes later, I had a sign off of $1 million to completely renovate the communications framework of that company. It was so dreadful. And interestingly, that CEO is now the CEO of the National Australia Bank, and he still carries that same passion. So if you're out there now, people, you want to impress Ross McEwen, do a demo. That's definitely it. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the awkward relationship that sometimes exists between executives who are at the table. Now, Tom, you've talked a lot about you can't go alone. There are no technology business cases. It always has a thing. How do you build relationships with those other people? You know, there's a lot of money invested in renovating Martech. Martech's hot. How do you bridge the gap between your teams, you know?
Yeah, look, I think obviously building relationships with your teams is really important at any level. And there's, to Megan's point, you know, the style that you operate in or the style you employ, it needs to be authentic to who you are, but it also needs to be adapted to who you're trying to build that relationship with. So, as technologists, we're often like problem solvers. So that's often a good angle. You know, how can I help you? What are the challenges you've got? How do I understand your business? How can technology fit into that? Become the trusted consultant, the trusted advisor. That's an approach that's worked for me. Works with my style and works with the kind of peers that I've had in my career. But I'm sure there are other styles and other ideas from the panel also.
Peter, you had to pull together multidisciplinary groups the whole world of data on its own is engineers, scientists, marketers. All they really wanted was just to segment the customers. Have you seen some great examples of that building of a coalition?
Yeah, look, I guess my go-to is to try and make the problem that you're solving meaningful to the people who are involved. So if you can find common ground, something that folks are keen to address because it's meaningful to them in some way, and you may have to frame it slightly different for each one of them, just so that it fits with their own thinking. That has a really powerful effect in bonding people toward a common set of goals and a vision. Maybe you're talking to a chief risk officer about your ability to uncover and remediate risk as part of your modernization. That's great. That's their day job. If you can make that relevant and say, well, if we don't do this, we're in a previous life worked a lot with utilities who ran the risk of starting big bushfires if things went wrong on hot days. If you talk about the human impact of those sort of events, it stops being a risk that's sitting in the risk register and becomes something that they really do feel a strong personal commitment to solve. So that's, I guess,
and is using things like that's a good answer. The flood of security, cybersecurity risk. Do you think it's making easier to invest in technologies, or because it's actually a pretty complex thing to explain? Is it just muddying the waters?
It's data, and more data, and it's inundating people at the moment. I think there's a real risk with security as an example of that flood just overwhelming people, and being able to translate that back into the impact on the business, the impact on your customers, and on society if you're in a business where that's going to be a consequence, is something that makes it far more human and something that really gets buy-in. So if you can highlight the business impact, of addressing those things, but connect it to some sort of human outcome or environmental outcomes. If that's what is motivating for people, then that for me, that's worked well.
I'd probably caution against, I think for security specifically, there's a lot of investment going there, so it's easy money in some ways, but I'd probably caution against using fear as a way to, kind of drive investment or drive support from your peers. I think that trick can get old, and so I'll probably start with value and what is it going to do for the business. And for some people, that value is reducing risk, but for most of the exec, that's not what they're worried about day to day. So.
And so, Megan, you and I have been around a little bit. I'm not insulting you by saying that. We've experienced in technology, and we've lived the Agile revolution, which of course is Thoughtworks has had a big part in lighting that fire over time. So Agile's always been a problem when it came to business cases. And I mean, I used to teach Method 1 in the 90s. Life was so simple. The business case was all big design up front. We knew 100% what the problem was. We just needed to do enough business analysis and deliver the solution. So this non-committal test and learn emergent architecture world of Agile, how do we handle that when we actually, the answers are, it's complicated, we don't know, we'll learn as we go. That's a whole new skill required.
Yeah, and those kinds of phrases, I mean, it may be the actual truth, but it's not helpful to the people who are hearing it, because they can't. Okay, so first off, what you've got to understand is how people are funded and where their budgets are coming from and how that addresses, because that's one of the major challenges, is that normally the money is not emergent, and so, but the cost of doing business can be. So it's like, okay, that's not going to work. But on the other side of it, actually what people want is they want a certain level of knowledge, and they want enough information to feel that they can trust you. And so it's a lot easier when you're well embedded into an organization, I think, to make those cases than when you're new to an organization, because you start to carry your own personal trust, or the piece of the organization that you're working with carries that trust, because people acknowledge that you can deliver, that you can actually enact on that, so we're willing to do it. If you don't have that trust, then what I would suggest is one of the ways that you do it is to work out that plan and to work out that kind of roadmap and make explicit like the decision points and the funding up until this. So we can do it until this point. You should get this. We can then make a call further on. The entire envelope is likely to look at about this much, and we will have those regular milestones in there. But I think there's a bigger conversation that needs to happen. And there's some nice conversations happening around it in the world of Agile. Melissa Perry and Jeff Patton are getting stuck into it at the moment, where it's like, there has been, and Agile has been the predominant method of looking at software delivery for a long time. But I think when we're talking about technology companies, and I think, Tom, this would be interesting from your perspective, and when you're merging product and technology, because Agile and the Agile Manifesto is written around the service of software delivery. Like, it's a custom service, as opposed to product is something different. And so Agile is not going to carry you through into a truly product focused organization. It's going to keep you as a separate technology organization within the business. So I suppose it's, what do you want? What do you want to be? And it's not to say chuck Agile out, because it is great at doing that piece of it. It's just and you can see various companies are morphing and changing as they deal with that. But so I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but I don't know, Tom and Peter, you were not along there. So what's your thoughts?
I think what I would say is I don't think Agile is not an excuse not to have a plan. Agile doesn't say you can't have a plan and you can't have a goal and you can't have a target. Like, there's nothing in the manifesto about that, as far as I recall. It's been a long time since I've read it. It might, but I don't think it does. So I think it comes into going with a position. What's the plan? And that plan might be some goals, some opportunities to make decisions of whether we're going to go left or right some checkpoints, and sort of provide the transparency and the levers that your stakeholder or your exec or your whoever's providing you the funding can pull on, and then they'll have the confidence to invest the dollars if they feel like they're in control. So probably just approach it that way. I think there are some areas where, I always think about one-way doors. Some of the things we do are one-way doors where it's a concept is you walk through it, you can't walk back. So if the project you're working on, the initiative is a one-way door, then a little bit more upfront design and rigor is warranted. And for example, we're building a new fulfillment center in Sydney. I think there was some press about that last month. That's a one-way door. We're going to spend millions and millions of dollars to buy a lot of machines. That's not agile. That's we want to be pretty sure. So the approach we take to that one is different to the approach we take to ask for money on a MarTech platform to do personalization, and that's fair enough.
Peter, have you noticed a generational change as we become more agile? Has it impacted the conversation around business value?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned, I started out my career working with defence in Australia, and you don't get much more waterfall than they were at the time. You're making $30 billion investments in a new fleet of something or others that float around, and that's the life of type on something like that was 50 plus years. So that they were very long-term investments, very expensive, that you'd do a whole lot of work on up front. Where we are these days is so far removed from that. But I think the opportunity that we have is to deliver incremental value with a lot of these things as well. It's different if you're building a fulfillment center, but from a software modernization perspective, being able to decompose, unpick your legacy estate and deliver incremental value also gives a lot of confidence, because you can show that it's working. And if it's not, you have those checkpoints, you have the transparency where you can be open with that and change direction as required. I think that for me is one of the real changes in behavior from the buyer side within an organization. So if you think of the business as buying a technology service inside the organizations, they become far more of a partner. They want to see the progress, they want that transparency, and they want to be part of the decision-making process. That for me is really positive.
Okay, well, this is the point of the show where we ask the audience if they've got any questions. They may not know that I can see all their names and may, in fact, call them out at some stage if we're left to us. I also invite Sarah, who is a great cross-examiner of the witnesses. If she has a question, just to unmute and pipe up, Sarah, that would be very welcome. Let's have a look. Questions, anyone? No, not coming in. What about, we didn't cover metrics, I know, today very much, partly because dashboards and those kind of things can be a tiny bit boring, but are they an important element of proving your case once you've got your 100 million or otherwise, or are they something we should desperately just try to kind of put it aside because it's a little more complicated than just numbers? Tom, you've made promises in business cases I've seen with some big numbers on them. How did you track them? What's your key metric that you think represents business value?
Well, first of all, I'd say metrics are super important. So if you're putting up a business case with no numbers in it, I'm pretty sure that's not going to get up. So that's a recipe for failure. The storyline won't do it. The story is a good way to introduce it, but you need some hard facts behind it. And I think the metric really differs. I feel like I'm not sure there's a single metric for modernization. It really depends on the challenge you've got and the business you've got. One of the key metrics we used at REA for modernization / tech investment was asset health. So we had a metric for all of our systems. We had 1,000 systems. Each system is rated. The rating is a red, amber, green on some dimensions. And then that was a very useful data set to be able to show to non-technology people, the state of the technology that we're operating. And for a product manager, it was very powerful to see that the product they're trying to build is on a shaky foundation, and therefore we need some investment. So I found that to be very useful way to translate technology technology state to kind of business users.
And I imagine in your current job, it's quite easy to convince the chief product officer that that tech metrics impact product. What a natural alliance that is. I think that's a great job tie up. Peter, favorite metric for proving value? And tell us one that actually turned up.
Yeah, it's not my favorite, but one of the things I learned along the way was, I'll go back to talking about risk actually. There's, if you're doing a modernization and a cloud migration as an example, you can think you understand your legacy estate, but you probably don't. And that will make the transformation potentially a little bit more complex, risky, expensive, all the things that we don't like to hear. And the rate of discovery, if you like, of finding those things that you didn't know were there, is not something that jumps to mind as being a positive metric, but it's actually a really good leading indicator of where you're going to land. If you're uncovering that complexity and you're trying to do the things, but failing because you found a bunch of stuff you didn't know existed, it tells you something about how fast you're getting through the unknown morass that sits inside some of the legacy environments. So it's one that I didn't think of early on and came across along the way. And it's been a really good way of not just, I guess, communicating what's going on within a modernization program, but also motivating the people involved, because it can be a little challenging, you know, if you're running into those challenges that you didn't expect as a delivery team, and getting beaten up because you're running late or you're running over budget. Being able to show that you're doing something which is positive, you're finding all these bits of dirty laundry that are hidden somewhere down in the closet, is really powerful. It's a good motivator.
Great questions just come in from Jeevan Wright, which I think is for you, Megan, because I empathize with it massively. I'm helping some friends with a startup at the moment and had to write the business case for them to not spend $50 a day on software development, but $1,500 a day with an Australian, a reputable software builder. And so that question is, when you're in that small, I mean, there's four people in the startup. When you're in that smaller situation, maybe a scale up, how does a technologist do a good job of explaining to their colleagues when there's maybe a very small tech team? It's not like Tom's giant army of software developers at Catch. You're just a small part of a business. How do you get your seat at the table and tell a tech story?
When it is just a small team, I think that is purely around, you need to build rapport and empathy, and to show like that you actually have their best interests at heart in that way, and learning to talk in their language, and being open to, you know how you asked what's the most difficult tech thing you had to explain at the start, so it's kind of circling back to that. And I think it is that ability to improve and to know, like, there are good practices and people and technologists in particular, it's like, yeah, no, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way. And you have to actually be able to answer to why, like all the time, like why, and that final why has to actually be related back to their goals and their needs. And that ability to be flexible in your thinking as well, I think. Like as a technologist, you need to be flexible to go, okay, this might not be best practice, but at the moment, what they actually need is to target is speed, and they need to, this needs to work. This can, quite frankly, you know, you can hire 2 grad students to, you know, do Wizard of Oz in the background, really is a cheaper way than building it until you know if it's going to work. So I think it's that flexibility and that ability to really understand why you do the things that you do.
Yeah, my favorite answer comes from a book, not surprisingly, because I'm a book nerd, but Bob Moesta's book, Demand Side Sales 101, he invented jobs to be done as a method. There's a little known fact for you. Well, I always thought it was Clayton Christensen in 2003, but no, he borrowed it from Bob. He has great methods which amount to your trade, Megan, with human-centered design and thinking about what the struggle of consumers is and how technology plays into that, and sometimes doesn't. Once, if you get to the core struggle and technology is a part of it, it's kind of a slam dunk. but it does. Let's raise the stakes a little bit in terms of tough question from Kyle Kennedy: long-term versus short-term. Now, I've been in plenty of situations where the CEO wanted a short-term result, and I was thinking like 3 to 5 years. Tom, some wise advice. You've got a long-term investment for modernization. It's going to take 3 years to do, and people want to see a bottom line impact in the next 6 months. Any advice?
Yeah, I think so 2 things. First of all, the long-term investment, by definition, is strategic. So, I'll be coupling something like that to what's the overall strategy for the business? What can we not do if we don't do this? That's the kind of story that you're selling. I think part of the question was about maintaining the focus. You've sold the 3 years investment, you've done the first year. How do you keep going and not lose focus? I'm not sure I've got a great answer to that one, other than I've got lots of battle scars. I think
okay. I'm going to throw it to our guest star in that case, because I do know she has had some considerable experience in helping people trade off short and long term. Sarah, what's your answer to that tough question?
I was actually just going to give a shout out to Megan. I'm gonna handball this one actually, because Megan's written a nice little article, a 2-parter, that describes shortest path to value and how we can continue to incrementally deliver our customers value as we slice up small little bits. And instead of going for big bang like flight, go dark and come back 3 years later with a modernized system, how we can incrementally target it. So Megan, just give us a little bit of a highlight on your shortest path to value.
Yeah, let's get a link to that paper as well.
Look, it's really it is around it's that tying of your tech strategy and your product strategy together. And going, okay, what are the opportunities that we have within the product strategy, and what are the needs that we have within the tech strategy, and can we match them up? Is there a way, and this is where you look at different approaches to cutting information, whether you're running a kind of a competitor business, competitor sort of business for a little bit and then gradually transfer over, or whether you take slices of audience, or whether you take kind of a part of a process. But find those breaks in the product or the way that you're looking at addressing needs, and then look at what you need to do technically, and then put your heads together and go, okay, how do we trade off between the two of them and get to what we need? So for instance, could you build up, if you're looking at a new tech stack, you likely, build up the piece of it that will allow you to launch a new little product into a new market or something like that, and go, okay, does it work? Does it not? Can we move more and more and gradually sort of move everything onto the new? That's one approach, and one approach that I've seen us tackle recently. So that's I think the way that you try and avoid that. It's not binary, short and long. It's actually, you've got a long-term goal, but you've got short-term drops to, again, build up that credibility that you can do it. So.
Excellent wisdom, and Sarah's put the 2 links to the paper in the chat. Pete, we're getting close to the end. Any wisdom to offer on that subject?
Anyone who knows me will have heard me say it many times, and I can't claim it as my own. I think it came from Elon Musk, that progress is the sum of all vectors. Anyone who's done their vector maths, and you can use that at a team level. If everybody's pulling in different directions, they all cancel each other out. But I think it's true also at a macro level when you're looking at longer term goals. It's okay to veer off the direct path a bit, so long as you're understanding what the cost of getting back on that path is going to be. And that they're pragmatic decisions that get made every day, that you may need to divert a little to pick up. My son plays video games. He goes over there and picks up the gold coin or whatever it is in the game, but he doesn't lose sight of that end goal because he knows how far he's got to come back. And I think that's a really powerful metric if you understand how far off the path you are and what the additional cost is. So yeah, add up your vectors.
Hey, look, we're getting near the end. Let's have a fun question to end with. What's the worst lie or inadvertent error in a story to invest in enterprise modernization that you've heard. I'll go first, and mine's actually related to Duncan's question. And the lie was, if we spend the next 2 years replacing this platform, product development will be much quicker. So let's see how I do against my competitors on the panel here today. What's the worst claim ever made in a business case that was just probably a bit far-reaching for an enterprise modernization business case?
Mine's
Sales
Okay,
just requires configuration only, no software.
I think mine was along the lines of, I'm going to use some poetic license, but along the lines of, if we just rewrite all our software and from language A to language B, we'll all go a lot faster.
Oh, Tom, that's not the functional programming religious debate, is it? We shan't touch that. That's the winner so far for having the most charged community. No, we should mention Peter.
Mine's just a variation on yours, Nigel. It wasn't faster; it was going to be cheaper.
Oh, yeah, the cloud's going to be cheaper. That's a clear silver medal. Megan, can you rush to the front of the Olympics of bullshit business cases?
I don't know. I don't know that I can beat just rewrite it in one language to another. But my favorite probably always is like, we can just buy this new thing and just plug it in, and that will instantly go faster and be smoother. That's probably.
And there it is, folks. That is the perfect summary of today's talk about enterprise modernization. You can buy anything you like. It's all online, download from the internet. Do give us some feedback about today. Thanks so much for coming. It's a dark evening on a dark day in Victoria here, and there's a link in your chat for some feedback. That'd be lovely. Email will come out to you with a video, and I just want to thank Tom particularly, who I know has an incredibly big and busy job as CPTO at catch.com.au, a huge year ahead of him. And Peter and Megan. Megan, this won't be the last time we have you on the panel, but might be some exciting variations on the theme in future. And Peter, thanks for your wisdom today. Sarah, thanks for keeping them in line. Tharoon for making sure all the technology worked, and Grace for doing the great marketing. Give Grace a break and click on that survey so we can find out what you thought. And everyone take care and have a very safe weekend. Thank you very much for coming. Ciao.